Today's question is, people of Reddit, when is one time you have felt genuine, 100% fear?
I was flying an airliner. We were maybe 1,000 above the ground while on approach to land at a smaller airport. There were thunderstorms in the area and we ended up in a microburst with zero visibility. We got a wind shear warning in the cockpit and started to go around. At full throttle and the nose up, we were still sinking at around 400 feet per minute. Everything seemed to be running in slow motion. Both me and the other pilot were running through our required actions and call-outs due to the training. In the back of my mind, all I could think about was I can't see the ground and we are falling. I know there is a hill out here somewhere. This is where I am going to die. The plane got down to around 400 feet off the ground before it finally started to climb. This was the most fear I had ever felt in my life. The time I got into bed with my girlfriend and immediately started coughing up blood, ran into the bathroom and held onto the sink for dear life. Every breath I tried to take, I just ended up wheezing more blood out of my lungs. By the time the ambulance got there, I had pretty much come to terms that this was how I died. Then it slowed down and finally stopped by the time I got to the ER. Long story short, it turned out to be Hodgkin's lymphoma. Had chemo for 6 months and am cured now with minimal repercussions. Scariest time of my life. I was riding my bike home from work along a pretty busy main road. I live in the city. I got to a downhill and started to pick up pace when I noticed a brown snake, which are very deadly, lying across the bike just lane ahead of me. There was a car in the lane next to me and it was too late to stop, but I somehow managed to dodge the snake and kept riding. About 50 meters later, just as I thought I was safe, I heard a very loud hissing and felt something rush past my leg and thought the snake had somehow caught up and bitten me. It turns out my back tire burst, but in the moment I was absolutely terrified. I got alcohol poisoning and it didn't hit till I was on a train. I had gone to the train bathroom to throw up, but I was dry heaving and I didn't have water and I could feel myself starting to black out. I was so fucked up I couldn't even see straight enough to figure out how to open the door, and I started to think, oh my god, I'm going to die in a train bathroom with my skirt hiked up. They're going to take pictures of this. Oh my god, people are going to see me like this. It was the most afraid for my life I've ever been, not because I was going to die, but because I was going to die alone, in a train bathroom, because I was too stupid to stop doing shots. As I started to see spots, someone grabbed me by the hair, forced a water bottle between my lips and was like, swallow. And I did, and I puked. And I did again, and I puked. And he got another bottle and did the same. And we went like that until I held down a few sips and blood started flowing to my head again. He got off at my stop and walked me home, waited while I threw up a couple times, and made sure my boyfriend was there to take care of me when I got home. The whole time, he was just bitching at me. Just a non-stop flow of, do you understand how much of a burden you've put on other people? I am going to be 3 hours late getting home because I missed my stop making sure you were all right. This is irresponsible. You need to take better care of yourself, learn your limits, and for fuck's sake, if you're not going to do that, at least wear pants. Just non-stop. He was right, on all counts, of course. That's what I love about Boston. People are assholes, all of them. But they're assholes that look out for one another. When my mom and then 5-year-old brother got in an ATV accident, they were driving slow through the woods and a large, dead tree fell alongside the trail, knocking down a smaller tree, which hit them both in the head.
Freak accident.
My other brother and I were outside filling the pool, and we heard my mom yelling something. I didn't know what it was, but my stomach dropped. We both ran to the head of the trail across the yard, and she was carrying my little brother, both covered in blood. She ran half of that mile-long trail carrying him. They were both in the hospital for a week. Mom got some stitches in her face, and my brother's skull was shattered, requiring surgery and a metal plate put in. He's graduating high school next year and doing well. I used to measure roofs for a solar company. One time I went up on a very steep roof of a 2-story house alone and without a harness. This roof plane was too steep to walk, and the shingles were old and crumbling, so I had to crawl so I didn't slide down towards the edge. After about an hour of crawling around, the sun began to bake the shingles so they were too hot to touch, so I decided to bug out. As the roof was too steep to walk, the only way to the ladder was by scooting on but with my feet pointed towards the edge. Every time I'd skid toward the edge, my heart exploded in fear because it was hard to stop from moving. I had to use my hands to slow myself down, and they were getting burned. All I could do was to rub my palms on my legs to transfer some of the heat, but they were being scorched. Imagine putting your hand on a hot frying pan full of grit. I was completely alone, in a faraway town, with no one to call. It took forever to get to the ladder, and by the time I did, I was shaking and drenched in sweat. When I finally got back to the ground, some people came out from a nearby house and said they saw me and were ready to call 911. I had burned blisters on both palms, and I never went on a roof like that again without a helper or PP. It was 5 years ago, almost to the day. I was home with my 2 daughters, who at the time were 3 and just over 1. I was giving them a bath, kneeling on the ground, and all of a sudden it felt like something exploded in my heart. I remember thinking, just get the kids out of the water. Nothing else matters. I got them out of the water and was able to call an ambulance. I was taken to the hospital, and long story short, I had blood clots in both lungs and my right knee. They think a piece of the knee blood clot broke free and passed through my heart. I am very lucky to be alive, and so grateful I was able to get my daughters out of the tub. I found out I have multiple blood clotting disorders and am on blood thinners for life, but I am alive. My first time doing truffles, we were in our hotel room plus another friend who was in Amsterdam with us at the time, for a total of 3 guys. I was just hanging out, being a jolly idiot in the bathroom, looking at the tiles. Walked back into the bedroom, and friend 1 is in a fetal position staring at our wide open window. We're on the top floor, so pretty high up. I can't see friend 2 anywhere, so I ask after him, only to get a 1,000-yard stare and the answer, he went out. I say that I didn't hear the door when I was in the bathroom. He didn't go out the door, says friend 1. So I sidle my way over to the window and can't see anything. I'm absolutely freaking out. All the thoughts about what we're going to have to tell his family, what do we do, etc., etc. I sit down on the bed next to friend 1 and just felt cold. Then friend 2 just slumps out of where he was, being an idiot, curled up in the wardrobe of the room. I don't think I've ever cried in relief before that or since. I've posted this before, but anyway, buckle up, it's a long one. We used to go sailing in the BVIs for summer holidays when I was younger. One evening, we were anchored in a bay with a party boat of teenage Americans nearby. After some alcohol, starting a water fight seemed like a great idea. At some point during the ensuing chaos, I ended up kidnapped and held as a hostage on their tender little motorboat for getting from sailboat to shore. They decided to drive me out to sea, and once we were thoroughly out of the bay, they started joking about tossing me overboard. Drunk me is not smart. Drunk me thought the best response to this joke threat was to stand up and yell, "You can't throw me overboard if I jump out," which I promptly did. They laughed and drove off. I was left floating in the middle of the sea about half a mile from shore in the pitch black. At first, the alcohol stopped me from panicking, and I decided to just swim back. Half a mile isn't that bad, right? Now my brain was beginning to wonder what was swimming around beneath me, but I was mostly calm until something bounced off my leg. This is the point at which I need to introduce you to the villain of this story. You see, usually the BVIs has lovely, safe, clear waters. However, once every 4 to 5 years, they get unusually high numbers of moon jellyfish. Of course, moons aren't scary at all. They rarely sting, and when they do, it's not even as painful as a nettle sting. They really weren't the problem. It was the creature that used them as a food source that was the danger. Known colloquially as the stinging cauliflower. They were purple balls of pure evil. In our marine life books, they were the only jellyfish that got the same danger/pain rating as the man-o-war jellyfish. Earlier that holiday, a young girl from another boat got stung while playing on the beach. We heard her scream from about a quarter of a mile out the bay at anchor. She went into anaphylactic shock and almost died. Side story: the vinegar and talcum powder we had stocked for jellyfish stings apparently saved her life, according to the emergency responders, because we zoomed it over when we heard the mayday on the radio. Anyway, back to my story. There I was half a mile out from shore in the pitch black with no idea if these kids were going to come back and get me, or if they would even be able to find me again in the dark, since I had no idea if I was drifting with any current. A moon jellyfish had just bounced off my leg, and where there are moons there were always cauliflowers. I was pretty certain if I swam into one and got stung, chances are I wouldn't be able to stay afloat and I would drown. I started to feel genuinely sick and scared, struggle to keep my breathing under control, etc. But there's nothing to do except swim and hope to high heaven I don't hit one. So that's what I did. It was over 15 minutes before the shitheads came back to get me. By this point, the panic and swimming had turned my muscles to jelly, and they had to literally haul me back into the boat. I never told my family or friends on the holiday, didn't want to ruin their fun. I just quietly told folks I was tired and went to bed. To this day, I can still taste the salt in my mouth and feel my heart rate and breathing increase when I tell that story. TLDR, I am a stupid drunk and jumped in jellyfish-infested water in the middle of the night and got left there and tried to swim back. I am lucky I'm not dead. I was sitting in the waiting room of the ICU talking to my aunt. My dad has just been moved from the ER to the ICU that morning. My mom was with him, but I had to go to the waiting room while they got him settled in. All of a sudden, I hear code blue ICU room XYZ. I didn't even know what his room was, but I just had this terrible feeling. My entire body goes numb. I look at my aunt and say I am going back there. As soon as I open the ICU ward door, a nurse looks at me and says, "Are you the daughter of so-and-so?" with a very empathetic look on her face. And I say, "Yes." "OMG, is that my dad? Is that my dad coding?" She says, "Come with me." We sprint down the hall to the back of the ICU, and I turn the corner to see a room full of people. My mom is standing in the corner, in complete shock. My 100% genuine fear? Standing in the corner of the ER watching nurses perform CPR on my dad. For 17 minutes. CPR is nothing like you see on TV. Any medical professional will agree with me. It is violent and intense. There were about 15 people in the room, and it is intense. Organized chaos. It is one of the worst memories I have, but talking about it somewhat helps. I miss you, Dad. This was a combination of fear and shock, but 2 years ago my now wife's roommate committed suicide. The day before he did, he texted me asking if I could come by after work to feed his cats. He said he would be leaving and wouldn't be back in time to feed them. It was a brutal 13-hour day. I came home first, grabbed my wife, then GF, who was at my apartment, to come with me so we could feed his cats and then go grab a late dinner. When we arrived, we opened the front door, which led directly to the stairs, townhome-type setup, garage first floor, main living area on the second. On the stairs, there was an envelope addressed to me, and the note inside was pretty much face value. My wife and I were joking and in high spirits on the way over there, and she really needed to pee. So she was a few steps in front of me as I was reading the note, which seemed like a fantasy. This is where my reality turned into a haze. The second sentence was, "There's no mess, but I have killed myself and I'm upstairs in my bedroom with the door closed." As soon as I read this, I very sternly told my wife, "Get down here right now and wait outside." I made the short trek up the stairs, glanced to my right, and saw his bedroom door closed. This is where my fear was at its peak, hoping this was just a fucked up hallucination. But when I reached for the doorknob and opened, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. He had a large medical-sized tank of nitrous that he had rigged up to a suicide bag. Google if you must. that he placed over his head and secured with a headband around his throat. His whole head was so purple and blue. I could feel myself about to puke, and I kind of tripped going back down the stairs and outside. I took my phone out without saying anything to my girlfriend, and she only found out when I told the 911 dispatcher that my girlfriend's roommate had committed suicide. After somewhat composing myself and heeding the dispatcher's advice, I ran back upstairs and removed the bag and began giving CPR, but I only made it like 10 pumps because fluids began coming out his mouth and his eyes rolled open, and they were just glosses over and lifeless and gone. The paramedic said he was gone for a while and there wasn't anything more I could have done, but I still wonder had I not gone downstairs first after discovering him to make the call, and if I would have taken that fucking plastic bag off immediately, he might have had a chance. But there you have it, my most fearful event. To anyone reading, this is the first I've ever written about this, and getting it out was very cathartic. Suicide is fucked. Please reach out if you are struggling. Life is amazing, and the friends and family you leave behind are scarred forever. Edit. Wow, Reddit. This was quite the surprise to wake up to. Thank you for the awards and kind words and support. This really was the first time I've put the experience into words, and it does make me feel lighter. My wife /Blumware Plarplanted is an absolute angel, and I don't know how I would have handled this without her. Please, please, please reach out and talk to someone. Anyone. Even me or other kind internet strangers. Do not make a permanent decision for a temporary problem. It was around 2 a.m. almost exactly 4 years ago. I was awoke by a sound that I can only describe as gasping for air to no avail. I looked to my left to see my wife with her head cocked back and right hand clenched in the air above her chest. I jumped out of bed, flew to the light switch and turned it on. When I looked back, her frail, tiny body and fell completely limp and silent, eyes wide open. It was right then that I just knew I had lost her. After all the pain, all the struggling, all the time in the hospital the previous year, this was it. This is fear. Stone. Cold. Fear. On Friday, April 4th, the year prior, we were on our way to the hospital to get her a kidney transplant. She was extremely nervous and had every right to be. It was scary, and after all, she was doing well on peritoneal dialysis, and she was otherwise very healthy. However, the thought of not doing dialysis was powerful enough she couldn't refuse. We get the hospital and prep for surgery. Nothing was unusual about the surgery. Everything went well, and she was out in a matter of hours. We spent the next 3 to 4 days in the hospital, and when everything checked out, they released us. We had to stay nearby, of course, so we were staying at her father's place a few miles away. A couple days went by, and the very next Friday, 1 week from her surgery, we headed back to the hospital for her first checkup. Everything looked great. She was still very weak and tired, but nothing was unusual about that, so we headed back to her father's house. This is when the nightmare started. She began having some stomach pains on the way back, but nothing crazy. She thought she needed to go to the bathroom. She does her thing when we get there, and she goes to lie down. It seemed like only a short period of time, maybe 30 minutes, and she was starting to bloat and feel extreme pain. We called the ambulance, and soon, seemed like hours, we were back at the hospital, and she was being prepped for emergency surgery. There was a hole in her cecum. While in the emergency room waiting for the surgery room to be prepped, the surgeon placed a tube in her stomach to release the pressure and try to ease her pain. It didn't work. She was suffering the entire time. Surgery took an eternity, at least 10 hours, and I was a wreck the entire time. I called back home to family and told them briefly what was going on and not to worry or drive over until the next day. There was nothing to worry about. Elite. I didn't want them to risk driving in bad weather. When she came out, she went straight into ICU, where she stayed for at least a month, sedated. While she recovered from the infection, the transplanted kidney was gone. She spent an additional 2 months in the hospital before she was allowed to leave. I stayed with her the entire time. You see, I was in college when this all started and had to quit. There was no way I was going to finish with her in this situation. I'm a software developer and was getting a degree just to have that piece of paper, so I wasn't really concerned. I landed a small remote job and worked right from the hospital room. We were focused on recovery at this point. My job was over, and I managed to get us into a program that paid the bills so I could stay home and help her recover. It was now September, and we had just found out that her right kidney had cancer on it, and they wanted to remove it. Her surgery was scheduled at the end of the day, and when the doc asked, "Are you sure you're ready? We should put it off." Hindsight is a bitch, and it seemed like he was tired in retrospect. But that's not what we did. She said she was ready, and 4 hours later the doctor comes out of surgery and explains. When he was stapling the area where he had removed the kidney he missed and struck her inferior vena cava. Thankfully, a new vascular surgeon was just in his car when he got the call, so he was able to get back in quickly and save her life. She now had a graft around her IVC and again in ICU as she recovers. 1 week later, on the mark, we're at home and I'm changing a bandage on her exit site and notice pus. Great. Just what we need. I call the surgeon and head over. She's taken straight into surgery where they flush everything out and find 2 holes in her intestines. Another bowel perforation. I'm not sure if you know this, but bowel perforations are extremely dangerous. They cause organ failure and often result in death. This is her second go with it. On top of the perforation and dealing with infection, she has this brand new graft around her IVC. Plastic. Plastic doesn't heal itself. So even if the rest of her body recovers from this new infection, what are we going to do about the graft? The new vascular surgeon was a graduate from OSHU and made the decision to send her there. She spends the next 2 months in ICU as they keep the exit site open and pack it with gauze so they can go in and flush the site. Again, she's sedated the entire time, of course. When the time comes to decide what to do, they decided it was best not to perform more repairs and instead work with what they had and let the body recover. They place drain tubes in the intestine where the holes are and attach them to one of those hard plastic drain containers. Sorry, I don't remember the name. She leaves ICU and goes to a regular room. That night her throat swells and she is unable to breathe. I'm woken in the middle of the night and her nurse even seems to panic a little as she's calling for the emergency team. This was scary. At the time, it was the scariest moment I had ever experienced. But it didn't hold the crown for long. I can't recall the name of it, but it happens from time to time. When someone has had a tube in their throat, as long as she had it causes inflammation. She goes back to ICU for a while and recovers down there after the second tube removal to make sure she was good to go. A few months later, and some heavy training on how to take care of her, we were sent home. She was not allowed to eat solids for 1 year. She was on TPN nutrition that I supplied with a pump through her CVC, along with her new antibiotics and antifungal medication. They decided the risk of trying to repair the IVC was too great, so instead she is to be on these new meds indefinitely, keeping any possible infections around the graft at bay. And then that dreadful night. Light on, her body lying limp. No motion, no sign of life. For a moment I was frozen and thoughts of life without her were flooding my mind. No fucking way. I turned and opened the door. Our kids were still living at home, so I started yelling, "Call 911," and didn't stop. During this time I went to her side and checked for a pulse, still yelling. Nothing.
No pulse, no breathing.
I start chest compressions. My kids were coming into the room by that time, and my oldest was on the phone with emergency. They mentioned the bed, and so I picked her up and placed her on the floor and continued with chest compressions until the ambulance arrived and took over. After 3 shocks she came to. Looked around the room with the most curious expression. It turns out she is QT sensitive, and the combination of antibiotics and her Zoloft and others were just too much, sending her into torsades de points. She had her medications changed and watched carefully since then, and no other issues. We spent the rest of her recovery year trying to keep her away from solid foods, which I tell you is a pain in the ass. Can you imagine not eating solids for a full year? Neither could she, tongue sticking out. She pushed things a little, but luckily nothing ever plugged her lines. On the day of her final surgery, the surgeon scheduled, I believe he said 14 hours, but would take more if necessary. He wanted to just take it nice and slow and make sure nothing was missed and reduce any risks as much as possible. Less than 2 hours later, he comes to the waiting room with a huge smile. Both holes in the fistula that had formed on the exit site were all within 12 inches of each other, and everything looked fantastic. A couple more weeks in the hospital, 1 week longer than typical, winky face, and we were on our way. This time for good. We signed up for a 5K next fall. I don't think we'll be running it, but we sure as hell will try, smiley face. Sorry for such a long post. I didn't intend to go into as much detail as I did, but it's one of those stories that if you tell a piece of it, you end up telling more of it to explain. I wouldn't doubt if I missed something. TLDR, wife went into cardiac arrest from torsades de points after a year or so long battle for her life in the middle of the night, and I thought I lost her. A couple years ago, I started to get really bad tonsil stones. These things are nasty and will make your breath rancid. I did everything I could to deal with them, but it was too bad. I went to multiple doctors, and the general consensus was I either deal with them or get a tonsillectomy. Let me rephrase that, an adult tonsillectomy. They are two very different things. When kids get their tonsils taken out, recovery is quick and relatively painless. But oh man, getting a tonsillectomy as an adult is a big deal. You can read online about the pain. Some women say it's even worse than childbirth. Anyway, the day finally comes for my surgery and I'm pretty nervous. It's my first time going under anesthesia. However, everyone around me seemed very competent at what they were doing, and I felt okay going into it. Next thing I know, I'm back awake and the surgery is complete. I lay in bed for a good short while, and finally when I felt okay, I moved into a wheelchair, still was a little wobbly from the meds, and was ready to be discharged. I actually felt pretty good, and was extremely relieved everything was over. I was in the wheelchair going out to the parking lot, with my mom pushing me, when I started to cough, and cough some more. Then a little bit of blood coughed out. Then some more. In a matter of merely 30 seconds, I went from being completely okay and on my way out, to coughing up more blood than I'd ever seen in my life. My mom rushed me back into the hospital panicked, as I'm literally choking on my own blood. By this point, everyone thought things were okay. My surgeon had left, and my surgical team had moved on to their next rounds of patients. When we came back in through the doors, the medical staff instantly knew there was a big problem. Within minutes, I was back in the hospital bed, with a new floor and a room full of visibly nervous, but professional, staff. I had a bucket in front of me to spit my blood into. I nearly filled the first one, and was given a second. I can post pictures of the second bucket if anyone is interested. Never filled it as much as the first one though. My surgeon finally gets back, as well as my anesthesiologist. Turns out, I had primary post-tonsillectomy primary hemorrhaging. It's pretty rare, only about 3% of patients get it. Well, turns out I had it, and I had it bad. Essentially, my cauterized wound had opened back up, and I was spewing out blood. The medical team informed me that the situation was serious, and I needed to go back under, but this time things would be a little different when I did. You're never supposed to go under when you don't have an empty stomach, because you can throw up and choke on your own vomit. Well, turns out I had swallowed too much blood, and they couldn't just put me under normally. I was informed that in order to go under safely, I would have someone pressing against my throat until I went under to stop myself from throwing up until they could pump my stomach. So there I was, back in the surgical room, still coughing up the most blood I've ever seen, feeling woozy from blood loss, as I was getting my anesthesia, and being choked out by a doctor while doing so. I felt genuine, 100% fear. I woke back up, and it seemed everything went okay. However, I cannot even begin to describe the pain that I experienced afterwards. It was the first time I had cried from physical pain in probably a decade. Ouch. TLDR. Got an adult tonsillectomy, started bleeding, had to go back under a second time while being choked out by a doctor. Boxing Day was great. Playing with family, enjoying good food. My wife was nearly 23 weeks pregnant with my twin boy, but she was having a great day too. She was having some Braxton Hicks contractions, which is normal about that time, but nothing serious. We get home, and she tells me the contractions are starting to hurt, so we call the hospital. It shouldn't be hurting, and they ask us to come in. Probably at 50% fear right now. I drive quickly to the hospital, which is about 45 minutes away. We get to the hospital in the late evening, and they confirm she's in labor. We've heard stories firsthand from people with twins that this can happen, and they have ways of stopping it. The doctors and consultants come in next and tell us that as my wife is not 23 weeks pregnant, yet they won't be able to help the boys if they're born. But if she makes it to midnight, they'll help. Also, the hospital we're at doesn't have an intensive care unit, so if the boys are born, they'll have to be transferred. Fear is up to 70% now, but they're going to try to stop the labor. We don't expect any issues. After several courses of medication and a sleepless night, nothing is stopping the labor. It's 8 a.m. and the staff changeover. Our new midwife is exactly who you want at your birth. An older lady who is maybe 10 years from retirement and has seen everything. She told us very clearly, it will be a miracle if these babies are born alive. It will be another miracle if these babies make the journey to the hospital with ICU. It will be a third miracle if they survive the journey through hospital. Fear is at 80% now. The labor goes well, and my two healthy, albeit tiny baby boys, twin 1 and twin 2, are born. We weren't prepared for names. 2 specialist ambulances arrive, each with their own specialist consultant and nurse, one for each twin. My fear has practically gone now, and I even turned to my wife and said that I think everything will be okay from here. We drive to the ICU and see our twin boys both in their own incubators, each with a dedicated nurse, and we're told they're doing well. The next 24 hours are a bit of a blur of new information, but the short version is that twin 1 is doing well. Twin 2 is on some medication for low blood pressure, but there's nothing to be concerned about. My fear is still pretty much zero compared to going through the birth, and I'm feeling positive. At hour 30, everything changed. We're told twin 2's blood pressure has been dropping steadily, and they're having to keep increasing his medication. They still have a lot of options, though. Another hour passes, and we're told we should probably sleep in one of their parent rooms on site in case things get worse. Another hour passes, and we're told that they're running out of options, and all of the medications are maxed out. An hour later, and my wife and I are holding our baby boy in our arms as he takes his last breath. We have to get straight back into the thick of it as twin 1 still needs us. But we've now seen what can happen. This is a whole new level of fear beyond what I thought 100% was. The first weeks pass, and as the connection between my son and I grows stronger, as does my fear of losing him. Calling the hospital at 5 a.m. every morning to check he's doing well. Some nights are better than others, but issues are common. Everything can change in an hour, so the walk through the hospital raises my fear until I get to him. Nothing is guaranteed here, and we've already seen what can happen. He gets sick on multiple occasions to the point where the doctors and nurses don't want to give us false hope that he'll pull through. He pulled through each of them, and after 9 weeks on a ventilator and several attempts to remove it, my son manages to last 24 hours with only assisted breathing. We're kept on ICU for another 2 weeks due to the rough journey he's had, and no one wants him leaving too soon. After 11 weeks in ICU, we're moved to the room next door, the high dependency unit. This is the first time my fear has dropped since losing twin 2. Twin 1 no longer needs a dedicated nurse 24/7, and we're allowed to play a bigger role in his care. After 118 days in hospital, we're finally allowed to spend our first few nights as a family, albeit in the same room we stayed in after twin 2 passed away. 3 days later, we're allowed to go home and start out life as a family. I'm happy to say my son is now a normal, hyperactive 4-year-old who you would never believe had such a rough start to his life. The only sign's been scars on both arms due to the number of cannulas he had for the food and medication he needed while he was still too small to eat or fight infection himself. I experienced more fear in those 4 months than I ever thought was possible, but I also received more miracles than most people receive in a lifetime. I got to spend 30 hours with Twin 2, and I get to spend every day with Twin 1 when neither of them should have survived the birth. It's a small price to pay. I attempted to check a leak under the sink. The leak was a few drops, but it stopped. So I unscrewed it a bit more in confusion. Obviously, I'm not good at any of this stuff. I really should learn, and then a bit more. Then the thing popped out and I had water coming out at an insane water pressure. You might ask why I didn't turn off the water in the kitchen first? The emergency thing was in a fucked place, and we didn't find out until the next day when the plumber came. Anyways, here I've got water coming out at an insane speed and strength, and I can do nothing about it. I asked my family to call for help as I attempted to force the screw head, what it's called, back in, but the water pressure was too strong. I experienced genuine fear. My dad told me about a week before that we were on the verge of going broke, and he could go jobless. I'm supposed to graduate in 2 months, and I haven't been able to find any jobs I can even apply for. I realized that I probably just fucked my family beyond comprehension. House floods, everything gets damaged. We'd have to pay thousands when we can barely pay rent, and there you go. I fucked my whole life because of my stupidity. I have never prayed to God for strength as much as I did at that moment. I'm not a big guy, so it was really hard for me to force the damn thing in when water is coming out at a crazy pressure. Eventually, I was able to force it in. This whole thing lasted maybe 4 minutes, but water had gotten to the endo of the house and almost flooded all rooms. There's a hallway that's like 5 meters, maybe between the kitchen/living room area and the rooms. Living room was flooded. We cleaned the whole thing ourselves because the emergency plumbers/people the building called didn't get there. 3 hours later they weren't there, and we had cleaned everything up ourselves. I think about if I hadn't been able to put it back in, putting it in was one thing. Being able to screw it closed was the hard part because there was barely any space and I couldn't use both hands. The whole fucking pipe system was loose from before, and I had to push the pipe with my right hand and attempt to put in and screw the head with my left. We'd be broke right now, possibly homeless/on our way to homelessness, and it would all be my fault. Probably not as dramatic, crazy as most replies, but honestly one of, if not the most terrifying moment of my life. Dying is not as scary for me as fucking my whole family to homelessness. Last summer I went to Albania on holiday. We were going to land in the capital, and then take buses out to some several thousand inhabitants village. A 4-hour bus ride which is very long by European standards. That driver must have been part devil, because he drove like a proper maniac. For those of you who don't know, Albania is a mountainous country east across the water from Italy. Now, driving across mountain roads is probably never fun. Being driven across mountain roads is less fun. Being driven across mountain roads in the middle of June, very warm, is even less fun. Being driven across mountain roads in the middle of June when I'm Dutch? You know, the country that is notorious for being flat? Holy shit. I didn't know you could up and down that fast outside of elevators and roller coasters. But wait, it gets worse. Just that stuff would have made me supremely miserable and reconsider how often I call my mother. But this driver must have been driving at least 33% above the speed limit on average, while consistently passing other motorists. In the mountains. On crappy roads. In the middle of sharp mountain road turns. While he's supposed to stay on the inside, he willingly would swerve towards the edge just to be done a few minutes earlier. Fuck. I spent approximately 3 hours of that trip slowly coming to terms with my death. I genuinely thought that this would be it. I couldn't communicate with the driver at all, so nothing I did would prevent it. At worst, I would cause the accident. If I had to die, I just hoped it'd be fast. So the first of the 3 terror hours was spent in absolute abject fear, the second in growing terror, and the third in a cold-blooded acceptance of death. Next time I'll rent a car, thanks. I came home on my lunch break to check on my ill 12-year-old. My abusive ex-husband's car was in my driveway. I had previous restraining orders against him, expired, but divorce decree states he was not allowed in my home for any reason. Clearly, he was there also checking in on our child. Child was fine, BTW, he just had a sinus infection. So I rationally entered my own home. This surprised my ex. He yelled, "What the fuck are you doing here?" I calmly replied, because I live here and I'm checking on Mike? The bigger question is, what are you doing in my house? There is a legal order of protection against you. He yelled again, "My God, do I hate you. I'm going to fucking kill you." And he pushed me as he ran to his car. We are both avid gun owners. Sport, protection, conceal, carry certified, hunting, the whole 9 yards. Is he going to his car for his gun? How is my son? What was he doing inside my house? Lock the door and check it all out. Son is fine. Nothing is out of order.
Ok. Fine.
Bam. X is pounding on the front door demanding my son leave with him. Well shit. Either this is just kind of fucked up, or this is when an abusive man breaks and actually kills the woman he hates the most. Obviously, I survived. TLDR ex-husband threatened to kill me in my own home. He pleaded no contest to disorderly conduct and was on probation for a year, did community service, and paid a fine. I spent more time and money on therapy for that. Had a near-death experience on a water sport crazy sofa thing. We told the guy to go fast, but he went as fast as his jet ski could go straight forward. He must have been doing 70 kilometers per hour going forward. Then he stopped and allowed the G-force to swing us around him. This was fast. We were airborne mostly, holding on to little handles. Our grip was getting weaker. Coming off was inevitable. Understanding physics, I knew the water would be hard. It even looked hard moving at that speed. It looked smooth, solid, and glistening. We were genuinely terrified. We were screaming, "I can't hold on." Arms and hands like jelly, probably moving at 100 kilometers per hour. During one of the swing maneuvers we bounced. My lower half bounced upward and I became airborne. I just flew away into the distance. My friend, who was still hanging on, said it was almost comical how quickly I disappeared. I woke in the water, face down. 2 out of the 3 clasps of my life jacket had been ripped off. Must have only been out for a few seconds. I recall skimming across the water, too fast to penetrate. Then, I started flipping across the surface, limbs everywhere. I don't even remember entering the water. My friend and I were giddy with adrenaline the rest of the day. The next day, I had to go to doctor for a painkiller shot for my bruised ribs. I couldn't even sit up from the laying position without being in agony. My friend hurt his back and ankle. Not as crazy as other people's experiences, but this was one of the few times I can perfectly recall that fear and dread and anger I had even now. TLDR at the bottom. A few years ago when I was around 15, one day my brothers, oldest T, second C, and I had just come in the house from an outing. We all go to our rooms and do our own thing. Usually when I get home, I immediately change clothes. It's the first thing I do if I'm not carrying anything, then go about the rest of my day. I didn't even get to that point. My mom, who I hadn't yet talked to, was in the bathroom right across from my room, primping. All of a sudden she asked where our little brother, K, was. He and I are 10 years apart. He has an 11 and 16-year age gap with our 2 older brothers. I tell her ick, probably in his room. She says no, she already looked, he's not there. So I'm like, well, maybe he's with Dad then. They were also very close, so it wasn't uncommon for them to sneak away and do bonding. She says, no, can't be with Dad. Dad has been out almost as long as you three. He hasn't even come in the house yet. For the record, my little brother is on the spectrum. Kay has selective hearing and mutism, and a love for hiding in obscure spaces and starting games of hide and seek without telling anyone else. It makes him hard to find sometimes. So I try not to let my paranoia and fear get the best of me and decide that could be it. I recruit my brothers to help find him, as he could get stuck or trapped in the places he likes to hide. I go to his usual hiding spaces, and he's not there. Brothers can't find him in the house or the backyard. He didn't hide in the car either. So now internally I'm flipping the fuck out. I have an extreme fear of myself or a loved being kidnapped / disappearing / trafficked / raped, never to be seen again. Kay and I are very close despite our 10-year gap. I tell my brothers and they go tell my dad outside while I inform my mom, who says she will call the cops and stay home in case he is somewhere around here. The four of us start searching our neighborhood. My dad hops in his truck to cover a wider area, and my brothers decide to cover the area around the nearby elementary school, which has a creek behind it that's easily accessible. I decide to search the route I sometimes take him on when we walk the dog. I ended up going twice, once with the dog, sniffing a shirt my brother had recently worn, and once without. No next-door neighbors were home, so I moved to the next block of the route. I showed a couple of people pictures of him and what I last saw him wearing, and where we lived if they saw him. I run the whole route and investigate any places I think he could be. Nothing. At this point I want to break down. There's been a couple kidnappings and rapes in our town, including a string of them behind the convenience store that's next to the school. I'm assuming the worst. As I'm walking down the sidewalk, having what I'm currently realizing might have been a panic attack, I hear a car behind me and my dad's truck is riding past with my brothers in the bed. They stop and tell me to get on. Mom said to come home. I don't remember if I got on or not, or if I walked the 3 minutes back to the house. Last thing I remember hearing is one brother saying something about me not breathing. But all I know is I'm in our driveway. I run to the house and meet my mom, asking her if she found him or if he came home. Did someone see him and drop him off? He has very good memory, and he knew our address? If he's there, is he okay? Where was he? Very calmly she says, no, he's not here. I'm thinking maybe someone saw him, and he's at the police station waiting to be picked up. At this point my brothers and are behind me just inside the door. Dad is right outside, smoking, taking the longest and hardest pulls of his smoking career. Nope, he's not there either. My mom finally, real nonchalantly, almost amused, reveals that he's with our cousin Bunny and her kids. He'd been there the whole time. He was never missing. Maybe if we'd been paying more attention to him, then we would have known that. To this day, I still am not sure how I was feeling when she said that shit. I was feeling way too much. All I had visions of were never seeing his face or hearing bad little kid jokes again. Having to plead on TV for his return, news crews, never knowing what happened to him, hoping he was alive or at least didn't suffer. All that shit, for nothing but her own sick amusement. I just turned around and walked out the door with my brothers. My dad has been listening through the screen door on the front porch and now had a new cig that was being worked for its money. The four of us and our dog just sat outside, on the lawn or the stoop, just really quiet for a good long while. We were physically tired and emotionally and mentally spent. My dad eventually went and camped in his truck and made some calls, I'm assuming to other family members that it was a false alarm. I don't think anybody but my little brother talked to Mom when he finally got home hours later. I don't think anyone in that house besides him even wanted to be around her if they didn't have to be. No one talked to our mom for a good long while, apart from Kay. That was the most quietest and heaviest atmosphere in that old house, up till my dad's suicide. I haven't thought about that incident since it happened. I repressed it so far and deep into my mind. I don't even know what made me think of it when I saw this. I just know all those old emotions came back for me a second time. My heart felt the same it did that day. My stomach is still dropping and churning as type this. The anger is still there, but more than anything the fear. TLDR. My mom convinced the family that my little brother went missing. Let us go on a wild goose chase for almost 2 hours before calling us back and smugly revealing she fucking lied. I am a small baby-faced guy in my 20s, and one evening I called an Uber to take me from my house to the gay bar where I was meeting friends. I think I was dressed pretty effeminately that night, with painted nails. The driver was a man in his 20s. He had a child's car seat in the back, so he had me sit in the front passenger's seat. Weird, but whatever. He starts chatting me up and getting weirdly personal. I don't remember all the stuff we talked about. He says he has a girlfriend and a kid. He keeps asking me about my girlfriend, making the bold assumption that I had one. It was really obvious to me that he was just trying to get me to correct him. Finally, I can't dodge the question anymore, and I say I have a boyfriend. The guy says, yeah, I guess I'm like bisexual. Haven't been with a guy yet though. Really creeped out now. He had a 5-star Uber rating, but he tells me I'm his first passenger ever. He says it took me a while to become an Uber driver. I had to pass a background check, so I needed to get some stuff, expunged. I try to ignore my growing discomfort and change the subject. I mention that I am into art and drawing, and now he wants me to draw a tattoo for him in the future. He keeps getting weirder and crossing more and more driver/passenger boundaries. Finally, we're getting near the bar, which I have never been to. He pulls up behind the bar, in a dark and isolated area under a bridge with very thick pillars. At this point, I have 91 dialed on my phone, and I'm ready to enter that extra one. I am so frozen with fear. I imagine men emerging from behind the pillars as if this was a planned attack. I have never been so genuinely afraid for my safety. I keep thinking, what have I gotten myself into? I'm going to be beaten. I'm going to be mugged. I'm going to be raped. I might even be killed. I tell him I think we're in the back of the bar, and thankfully he turns around and drives me to the front. He wants to keep in touch, so he asks for my number, and I'm so afraid that he's going to call and check to make sure it's the right number that I actually give him mine. He asks if I want him to walk me into the bar and says he'll give me a ride home for free. I politely decline and go into the bar, very shaken up. He texted me once, but thankfully I didn't hear from him after that. I told my friends that I met up with about what happened, but they didn't really understand the severity of it. Only my female friends really understood the terror of what I had been through. I switched to Lyft after that. The worst part about this story is that I didn't do anything afterwards. I wanted to report him to Uber, but if I really was his first passenger, he would know it was me, and he knew where I lived. This was a few years ago, and I regret so much that I didn't call Uber and explain the situation. I really hope he was just a creep with boundary issues, and nothing more dangerous. Got pulled over a few years ago. Myself, a friend, and my 2 kids in the back, both males, 11 and 9 at the time. Cop got my info. Then as he walking back to his car, he started yelling for my kids to put their hands up. He yelled, "Put your hands up," 3 times. During which time, I looked back to see him stepping behind the back driver's side window and put his hand on his gun. I was scared out of my fucking mind. I thought this cop was gonna shoot my kids right in front of me. I yelled at my kids to raise their hands as I look at them. Both hands were already raised, but they raised them higher, and I could see in their face they were scared shitless too. I turn to the cop and tell him that we are unarmed. There are no weapons in the vehicle. He responds, "Well, what's that?" It was a yellow and purple Nerf gun. It was on the seat next to my kid. My kid had shifted in his seat while the cop was walking back to his car. The cop caught a glimpse of this obviously fake toy and panicked. I told him it was a Nerf toy gun. Cop just walked back to his car. After a few minutes he came back and gave me my info back, said, "Sorry about the scare," and walked back to his car before I could say anything to him. Probably for the best, as I was furious at this point. This cop didn't pull his gun out at us, and he did apologize for the scare even if he didn't give me a chance to respond. But there's something wrong when a small-town cop panics when an 11-year-old shifts in his seat. His job is not that dangerous. Children shouldn't scare him. He saw a yellow and purple plastic toy and reacted without taking the extra half second to see it for what it was. A fucking toy. And in his fear, he scared the shit of me and my young children. I'm a Hispanic man, and with all the violence cops are committing against minorities lately, well, for a second I thought my children were in danger of getting killed right in front of me. I've never been more scared. During my senior year of college, I lived off campus in our de facto fraternity house. Actual fraternity and sorority houses were banned by the city, as they were considered brothels, even in 2019, on the same street as this house, but on the other side, about 3 to 4 blocks, no more than a 7-minute walk, down there is the bar that serves as pretty much the main go-to bar for the college. It's worth noting the school had between 1,600 and 1,900 students. One particular night, my dinner and the alcohol I was consuming at the bar was not mixing well, and I decided to walk home alone and smoke a blunt and go to sleep. As I'm walking on the side of the street with the bar, I notice 2 figures up ahead. One is riding a bike and looks small enough to be a kid or teenager, while the other is walking beside them. Something about them gives me the heebie-jeebies, so I cross the street and am now walking on the same side as my house, though at least 2 blocks away, probably more like 3. I notice the 2 figures notice me, but I don't think they knew I saw them seeing me. The guy on the bike suddenly hops off of the bike and literally just leaves the thing there on the sidewalk and keeps walking. As the other kid went to pick up the bike, the first one pulls a fucking gun out from underneath his sweatshirt, and they pull into a little alley that's too dark to see them. Considering this took place less than a year after a friend of mine was held and raped at gunpoint, I noped the fuck out of there and walked right back to the bar. I called campus safety for them to put out an alert so any students at the bar would know someone's got a gun nearby. Then I called the city's police department. I waited for my housemate to drive to pick me up outside of the bar as a few police cars made some rounds around the area. A minute before my housemate got there to pick me up, I see the kid with the gun riding around the bar on the bike. We made direct eye contact. Needless to say, I made sure nobody in my fraternity or any of the sororities walked home alone from the bar for the rest of the year. In fact, I started a service where you could be walked home by members of our chapter. Have battled anxiety attacks since I was 5. Undiagnosed and unaddressed until my early 20s. Most particularly bad I was 19, completely shutting down, so my girlfriend took me to her place to keep an eye on me. I was often suicidal, and she was a saint I have never deserved. In the car on the way over, I was doing particularly poorly and started hallucinating. We were driving down the highway at night, and I saw my embodied fear in a figure made out of black smoke in the road. It had red eyes and wanted me to die in fear. I screamed. After we drove through it, I turned to see it behind us, and it was in the back seat reaching forward. I started screaming and immediately tried to leap out of the car. The seatbelt kept me from making it all of the way, so I started frantically unbuckling and jumping at 60 mph. My GF, driving, gripped my arm with everything she had, and I fought her and the seatbelt. I got real lightheaded from forgetting to breathe for a minute or so after hyperventilating, and she got me back in the car and pulled off the road. It was a real rough night of many to follow, but it was the most fear I've ever experienced. I've wrecked motorcycles before at 50 over 55, and I was keen to bounce down the road to escape this embodiment of fear. There was no fight or flight, just flight. Abandon anything and flee. Been married 10 years, wonderful kiddo now. Still a lot of baggage from those days. Still don't deserve to be with the amazing woman she is. Medication is a wonderful thing. Anxiety is still a part of my story, but it's less intrusive most days now. I was 18 at the time. It was around 11 p.m. at night, and my entire family was away for the weekend. My younger brother had a soccer tournament in NYC. We have an alarm system, so I was not too worried at all. I was in bed watching YouTube videos when I heard some faint banging on side of the house. It was odd for sure, but I was unfazed. You know how in horror movies the main character always hears slow, creaking footsteps? Well, all I heard was someone sprinting up the basement stairs. My body went absolutely numb, heart rate went up, entirely ready to either run or fight, probably adrenaline. I snapped out of this numb phase when my phone buzzed. I sprang into action, opened my window, and stepped onto the roof. Thank God I did, because whoever it was started up the stairs to the second floor and started searching/clearing bedrooms. I called the police. They sent officers. So there I am, chilling on the roof in my boxers, shaking from adrenaline and fear, waiting for the police to show up and save my ass. Long story short, cops showed up, breached the home. Lots of yelling. Man was apprehended. Jewelry thief. Apparently he thought no one was home. We came to find out the person we rent the house from didn't alarm the basement sliding door. Never felt so much tension and fear in my damn life. I think the sad part is that almost a year later we had another break-in while I was home. 1992 Berlin, and my friend and I had arrived from Copenhagen on the night train to a massive skinhead rally. As soon as we left the train, a policeman came up to us, to me, and said, "Be very careful today. They don't like foreigners. I'm half Asian but look more Asian than Caucasian." We couldn't find any youth hostel, backpacker accommodation, and wound up in the former, and at that stage still very bleak, East Germany, at some gigantic communist-style tower block. I'm not sure if it was a hotel or not, but there was one surly woman who gave us a room key. As far as I could tell, nobody else was there in the entire building but us. We dumped our stuff, went and checked out Berlin, and came back in the evening. My friend said we were being followed, but I couldn't see anything, and we called it a day. Woke up an hour later to the room glowing red and screaming coming from the car park outside our window. We looked out. The whole front lot of this building was full of skinheads, all of them looking at our window. They were firing flares up at our room, hence the red glow. And then one of them produced a pistol and began shooting that. The little English that we could hear, they were telling us they were coming to kill us. We shit ourselves, barricaded the door with the beds and a wardrobe, and sat under the window while it got shot to pieces, and listened to them kicking the doors and downstairs. I'm not sure what happened, but the noise died down, and when we were brave enough to look out the window again, we saw the last of them walking away. I'm sure they were just having fun, scaring the tourists, but I didn't know if I was going to survive the night. And this is the end of today's video. I hope you liked it, and don't forget to comment an anecdote or experience similar to the topic of the video. Leave your like, share if you like the video, and lastly, don't forget to activate the little bell so you don't miss any of our daily videos. Bye-bye.